Greetings, folks. This is Scott, and you're tuning into A Woman's Place, the podcast where we break down all the policies and politics that affect the 51%. That's right, women are half the U.S. population, and Ashley and I are here to give you the facts about how today's events are affecting them. Find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Good afternoon, Ashley Brown.
Hey, Scott Osborne. We've been seeing a lot of each other, which I enjoy.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. And you're still doing the green glasses thing. I like it. It's a rip.
You know, I misplaced my red ones. I kind of would have rather had the red. They'll be back. I will find them. They will find me.
Good.
I know.
Good.
I'm really excited about today.
Me too.
Mm-hmm.
So should we dive right in? Do we want to say anything preliminarily, my friend?
Well, I just think that all of the conversations we've been having, and certainly it's in the name, A Woman's Place, but men and our relationship with, and the other half of our society. I love that we're focusing on this topic today. And we've done the stay-at-home dad. I don't know kind of where that's going to land in these, but I love broadening the perspective, which is wonderful. So
we are not in a silo. We are not in a silo. And as I say, always the gender equality advocate. Gender equality benefits everyone. This is not a pie that we're dividing up and someone gets more or less. It benefits everyone. So today, though, we are talking about men. I sort of called it what's going on with men and mental health. I know our guest speaker has a special interest in mental health, but there has been a lot in the news. This is also an issue that I personally have followed closely, sort of masculinity, the same way we study sort of gender roles and what's been happening with men. So we're going to talk about, we have two parts to this, so I'm looking forward to that. Talk about what's new, what's trending, what we're seeing. We did talk a little bit in the conversation about Gen Z, if you haven't listened to that, about what some of the polls and the voting data show that men and women are kind of moving apart, younger generations, on a lot of topics. So this might sort of circle around to that, and we're going to take a look. So should I tell us about the guest? Tell everyone about our guest?
Yes, and then we will invite him in to join us.
So Dr. Phil Wagner, actually, I've known him for probably 10 or 15 years. He is a professor at William & Mary in the business school, the Raymond Mason School of Business at the College of William & Mary in Williamsburg, Virginia. But he used to be here at USF. He was an administrative position and a teacher. He's in the organizational behavior department at William & Mary. And one thing that I noticed, in addition to the classes that he teaches, he received the highest award, the Faculty Excellence Award, otherwise known as the Thomas Jefferson Teaching Award at William & Mary in 2025. And he has been a speaker for other things that I've heard him speak. He's very well versed in organizational behavior. He works with students all the time, so he has his fingers both on kind of the academic side as well as what's happening with young people today, and is very well steeped in some of the gender nuances of what's going on. And I think he'll be delightful to hear from. So let's bring in Dr. Phil.
Absolutely.
Maybe we should call him Dr. Phil.
We should call him Dr.
I think so.
I think we'll just start right now.
I think so too. His name only says Phil, but we want to know if we can call you Dr. Phil.
That's what my students call me.
Well, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for taking the time. Are you in Virginia? I know you were traveling, but are you in Virginia now?
I am fresh off the plane from Long Beach, and I am in beautiful Williamsburg, Virginia, where the leaves are changing colors and it is gorgeous outside.
Lovely. Nice. I have lived in Virginia 4 or 5 times in my life, not in Williamsburg, but a number of times. And Virginia does seasons well. I always say Virginia does seasons very, very well. They've got it down.
Agreed.
Yeah. So, I'll tell you where I would love to start is, I said we're going to talk about so many things about men and gender, but there's this fairly recent Equimundo report. For folks who don't know, Equimundo is one of the premier global organizations that looks at the state of men, and they advocate for gender equality. They do research. They've been doing research all over the world for a long time. They initiate a variety of programs. I know now they're looking a lot at men in the digital space, which is quite interesting, but they do the state of men, and they do a report called the State of American Men. And so it's a great piece of finding. And their 2025 report had a number of findings, which I thought we should sort of put on the table and see how they strike. Are we seeing this? Are we feeling? I'm just going to run through a couple. The first one Economic anxiety. Economic anxiety seems to loom super large for men. Men's views about masculinity are becoming tighter. Again, this is survey data, doesn't apply to everyone. Becoming tighter, more restrictive, not expanding their sense of gender role, but really feeling in the face of this anxiety that being a provider is central to manhood. And three, men are isolated. They feel no one cares about them. They feel it's a pessimistic time. So I'm just going to start with those three and see if you folks have some thoughts or comments about how you feel about that data.
What do you think, Ashley? Oh, we did the thing where we tossed it to each other.
We
What do you
did.
think,
No,
Ashley?
Phil, we don't start with you. You
Oh,
pick
you guys
anyone.
started. Oh man, I'm trying to be polite because I'm a guest here. Okay, fine. I
Don't
think.
worry, Phil. I
Oh,
will have lots of
all right. Okay.
appropriate
Fair
thoughts.
enough. I think there's two ways you can read the report, right? It's the lens that you take, and you can take a doom and gloom lens, and there are causes to be concerned about as you read that data. But as
Yeah.
I read it and I zoom out, what I really walk away thinking is that men's wellness and gender equity, they're not competing goals, that they are linked, and you have to think about both of those. And we have to rewire how we think about what it means to be a caregiver or a partner or a community member. And so I think like it's an invitation to reimagine manhood. I also like that some of the work from Equimundo also talks about starting early. Like you can't fix masculinity for men in their 40s if you don't start teaching them emotional literacy at 10. And I'm really heartened at how some of the progress is being made. And so I kind of like the study because it cuts right through the noise. It doesn't say that men are the problem. It kind of shows us men are hurting, and maybe that's part of the
Yes.
problem. And
Yes.
from there, you take out shame and you center empathy, and I think you get somewhere different.
Yeah, I love that you say we were just talking earlier about gender equity, and I always say gender equity benefits everyone. This isn't pie. Too many people are still stuck in this notion of, you, me versus you. And so it is true. But the one thing that I felt a little more pessimistic is that men's views as a reaction to this getting narrower and feeling that okay, they've got to sort of drill down on a few central aspects of manhood and wishing that the response were more open. Maybe that will just take time. I don't know.
Yeah, I think we are in a pivotal time of shift. And like that's not just like anecdotal, like, I wonder. Like, look at how the world is spinning so rapidly. So I
Mhm.
think it's normal for any human being, men included, to feel confused and reactionary because for many people, economically, socially, politically, the rug has been pulled out from underneath you. I think that it's a date and time snapshot. And I hear you, Scott. Like there are some things to be concerned about for sure, as there have been with every generation, every reactive movement, every era. But I still think that there's a there that's not entirely pessimistic. That again, anytime there's a problem, there's an opportunity, there's an invitation to reimagine a solution. And I think that there are some interesting pieces on the table that we can move around as a collective humanity to reimagine what that means and right some of the wrongs and get us in the right direction. Maybe I'm too much of an optimist. I don't know. Who knows?
No, I'm an optimist, and we are definitely going to take time here later and talk about, some of those solutions and what could work. But here's one I just love to know your thoughts on. I'm just going to ask you everything here.
Please do.
I often say that fear seems to be behind so much of this anxiety. People don't always describe it that way. I don't know if they would
Oh, yeah.
articulate it that way, but just some of the changes. And again, I think of these as global and economic and social changes in the last 50 years have just been very, very radical in people's position in the world, the digital revolution, social roles. It just feels so different. And how do you see that?
Well, nothing good comes from a place of fear. And so you're right to call that out. But you tell me any positive thing that comes from fear. It doesn't. So you have to be intentional about moving from that space. But I also want to normalize it is perfectly normal and acceptable to be afraid. And that's not a feeling that men often own. I do not believe that we were designed to carry as much information in our heads as what we are consuming. I don't know if you're on social media, but I am. I mean, my TikTok algorithm, I'm not even sure if you're allowed to use TikTok in your state, but we are here. My TikTok algorithm
Good
Yeah,
one.
Florida
takes
still
me
has its TikTok, Bill.
all right, all right. But it takes me all over the world, right? And that's good and it exposes my mind to so many things, but consequently, I'm also carrying like what's going on in Nepal and what's going on here. And you should be don't like please, we shouldn't have your head in the sand, but we're carrying so much. That coupled with the rapid change. I mean, did you even have the language to speak of generative AI in 2021, which was not that long ago? No. And now it is fundamentally rewriting what it means to be a worker and what it means to be a human. I mean,
Totally.
the last 4 years. And that's like
Yeah.
one leg of a multi-pronged stool.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I think fear is natural, which is why I don't want to get overly like doom and gloom because it's just we have to find a solution through that. It
Mhm.
begins with normalizing those emotions and fears and then saying, okay, well, like what do we do to bring everybody together? Because like that's not happening. Like people are more divided than ever, it seems. I talk about this in the classes that I teach. Data from the last few years shows that in the United States, it's gotten so hot politically that more than half of people surveyed think that we could logically be careening towards the next civil war.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
that's not healthy. And it's not just us after like a complicated election cycle. In developed nations, more than half of those surveyed across the globe said that their nations are far more divided today than in the past. So again,
Mhm.
what we're talking about is symptomatic of a lot bigger picture than just masculinity. There's so much
Absolutely.
going on. But I think this small portion of the pie, by sort of looking at what's going on here, can give us a recipe or a blueprint to figure out some of those other issues or at least begin to address them.
Yeah, absolutely. It is global and it is so many big things. And the part that I guess I would say worries me is exactly if we continue to divide, and we have so many other reasons that are dividing us. If we're also divided by gender as opposed to pulling together, then
Mhm.
that's not going to. But it's an interesting segue into a few more of the
Wait,
Equimundo.
wait, before we go,
Yes,
before we
go.
wait,
She's ready. Come on. Ash.
Phil, you got to just jump in. So
Get it.
before we leave fear, because I think that that's an interesting one, I think control
Mm,
as well. So it's so interesting. I had a couple of conversations with men in particular in their response to COVID restrictions, and then
Mhm.
kind of why they got very anti-government, feeling like the government was telling me what I could do, what I couldn't do with my business. Then I lost my business because of, in that response. And then the same in Scott, we just talked about it a couple of episodes ago of for some men, having children and family is their big sign of success. And again, talk about something that men don't have control over because they need another partner to make
They're
that happen.
independent now, right? Women
So
are
would
independent.
control be right there with fear, I would think. That
I,
loss of control.
I think it's a fear of a lack of control, right? I do think that those are closely coupled. I think that's one of the big catalysts. Like, Scott, we've talked about the stool, right? That men have sort of built an identity
Yep.
upon, and I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit today. But like those traditional pillars of what is it, honestly, to be very fair, a very Western notion of masculinity,
Yep. Yep.
and a very sort of like snapshot in time Western
Yep.
notion of masculinity. But that stool, it's a little wobbly, right? And so I think men are stressing, and honestly, some women, because masculinity is not just an embodiment, it's also an ideology that some women uphold as well, right? So
Absolutely.
there are things that I think we can dismantle there, but I think you're right on the money. It's a fear of a lack of control.
Well, and to plug another podcast, I just saw an excerpt from Kara Swisher's with Brene Brown. I don't know if
Hmm.
you guys have seen it yet, talking about fear. And I love that Brene talked about the fact that she has a coach that she checked in with and was kind of like her coach was like, there's that line. And if you're below the line, fear is driving the bus. And if you're above the line, so it just how you communicate, how you respond, all of it, like control and fear, bad. So,
Yeah.
Yeah, and
So
yeah, go ahead, Scott.
one of the other findings was that pressure to be a provider and the economic anxiety are exacerbated by spending time online. As you're mentioning, Phil, we have so much information, and online it's such a double-edged sword. It gives us many wonderful things, exactly, connections, ideas, but we are just not used to sorting out all of this information. And because it's such a reinforcing silo, they literally tracked the fact that men and women are literally spending different places. I'm sorry, they're going to different places online. So they're seeing entirely different ecosystems, which is probably one of the first times in history that I can think of, we got these totally different information databases. And that seems to be exacerbating some of these gender issues. And that's going to be an interesting one to plumb through with time.
Yeah, I mean, I also think the online space is ripe for men to have conversations about identity and masculinity because the way that the social order has been set up, I heard a comedian sort of wax on this, and I'm going to botch their words. I can't even remember who said it to give a proper attribution, but it stuck with me. You know, if you're, and of course, I'm painting with a very broad brush here, but like if you're a woman and you experience a life challenge, big or small, you likely have 3 or 4 people in your phone that you can text right away about that challenge, or you can get on Facebook and you can talk about that problem, and some other woman across the globe is going to come and be like, "Tell me, girl, like what's going on? Yeah, I feel you too. I had that same experience." Like women are drawn to systems of social support in a more de facto fashion than men, right? Men, by and large, and again, I'm painting with a broad brush, unless they're intentional, like you think about my father's generation, they didn't talk about feelings. Now you're moving into millennials and Gen Zs that even if they're willing to talk about it, aren't as conditioned to have robust social networks or to be support providers to each other. The online space gave a safe place. You could, post under a pseudonym. You could find like-minded folks with shared interest. You could do it on your own terms, but the problem is everybody is some fictional persona of themselves online. So it was sort of a recipe for disaster making, and that's why you've seen online spaces, which frankly could be really healthy if channeled in the right direction. They've become spaces of radicalization and some extreme forms of radicalization at that. And so again, multiple ingredients to create this recipe for a perfect disaster.
So I want to go back to one of the first things you mentioned, because this comes up a lot about women are more likely to have these social networks that they can seek out, men are not. I always say that's due to socialization from very, 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 very early on. It's not come from the womb, for heaven's sakes, and that men are hesitant to reveal vulnerabilities. They've this competitive nature, and if you can't reveal vulnerabilities, it's hard to have that social network. Do you see it that way? What am I missing? I mean, why, if we go back to, okay, why don't men have more? Why don't they have 7 people in their Rolodex and, whatever that is online that they can go out to? Why don't they have those friends?
I definitely think it's an issue related to socialization, right? Like we know there's a lot of research that talks about how girls and boys are conditioned differently. Even boys being conditioned towards contact sports, which breed sort of an inherent level of competition, particularly with other men, which breed this sort of tough guy ethos that then exacerbates out over the lifespan. You get into the work of people like Jackson Katz, who talk about how that masculinity conditioning is sort of like, again, the perfect catalyst for violence, specifically men's violence against women or men's violence as it's enacted through acts of mass violence or atrocity. Women, I think, are conditioned to be more in communal spaces for better or worse, right? And I'm with you on wanting to break out of sort of gendered stereotypes that are antiquated.
Yeah.
The caregiving ethos is one that is defined by support, and that's not an inherently bad thing. The Equimundo talks about like what we really need to do is like think about how caregiving can expand to be an identity that we all have access to. So, I think that's part of it. We're conditioned so differently from such a young age. I do think my generation, like, millennials, we get a lot of hate. I think we've been really good at bearing the brunt of a lot of social shift, and millennial parenting, dare I say, is really darn good parenting. I'm not just talking about myself, what I see in colleagues and in my friend groups. Gentle parenting, we did that, right? Teaching our children how to like actually maybe push past those gender stereotypes. Y'all started that. Like we helped push that. And like you look in our elementary schools and our middle schools, you're gonna find a whole mixed bag compared to what you found in the 70s and the 80s. And so I do think shift is happening, which is why that data doesn't scare me as much as it may scare some other people because I see Gen Z and Gen Alpha, and I don't think it's all bad. I think there is shift coming, and I've gotten so far up on my high horse. I forgot what the question was, but it doesn't even matter.
That's
Get me
right,
back
but,
on
but I'm going to stay. I'm going to stay on that tangent for just 1 minute because when we talked about Gen Z, there was this interesting, almost sort of schizophrenic data that on the one hand, Gen Z are much more accepting of
Mhm.
homosexuality, LGBTQ, all of this, you see data that's it's just part of the norm of their lives. And on the other hand, you see some of them going more toward traditional religions and wanting this traditional masculinity. And, it's almost like, are these the same people? Are they crossing? Are they sitting side by side? I don't know what the real one is. And I agree with you on millennial parenting. Most boomers were sucky parents. They really just were terrible. The millennials, I think they're doing a good job in while we're generalizing.
Yeah, I think a lot about Gen Z because I've got one of my kids sort of rides the line between Gen Z and Gen Alpha, and my other one is Gen Alpha. I'm a father. That's a big part of my identity, and I think there's a lot to explore there too. I do think, yes, let's be honest, like some younger men, Gen Zs, are sort of leaning more into that, I don't know, older way of thinking, maybe traditional masculine belief system
Like
for sure.
machismo, kind of. That's
Yeah, I think
aggressive
it's worth
masculinity.
I think it's worth noting, but also there's multiple truths here because I don't think it's the same version of toxic masculinity that we've warned about for generations because as you know, there's this data from the same group, much more concerned about issues of climate, much more concerned about issues of like economic justice, much more interested in issues of community, much more accepting of sexuality and gender identity. And so again, I go back to what I said earlier. I think those men are taking an invitation to maybe reimagine. And anytime you refashion something, it's messy, right? If you've toyed in a
Yeah.
work job, you've made cookies, you've done anything that involves bringing multiple ingredients together to turn it into something new, you got a mess to clean up along the way. And so I do think there's some messy sense
Yep.
making.
Yep.
And let me also say, as someone who loves politics, right? Like the political landscape and the political system in the United States is a mess. There's how many options on a ballot? Pretty much just two major ones, right? And so I think you've got many young people who, unlike the generations before them, and that's millennials included, are like, I'm not willing to fit in one of those two boxes. They are
Totally.
too limited.
Absolutely. They're just like, this whole thing is whack. Yeah. I completely agree with them. So,
So when I
but
hear
we
like
don't
Gen
think it.
Z,
Yeah.
I think they're like, I don't see myself fitting in these boxes that I'm handed. So I'm gonna pull on like what's
Mhm.
available to me and I'm renegotiating. And so that's where I think work like this and the work that you're amplifying here, where we can get those men who are in this sense-making process to recognize, hey, it doesn't have to be either or, right? You can lean into everybody's allowed to have a gender identity. Like it's okay to be a man, to be a woman, to be somewhere on a different spectrum altogether. Like again, that's where the younger generations are really cool and hip. It doesn't have to mean one big thing like it did for your grandparents' generation. To be a
Yeah.
man can be to be concerned with care, to be concerned with connection, to be concerned with community. You can rewrite that script. And so again, I'm choosing to take an optimistic lens here. I do think there are some things that we have to watch out for, but I think in the grander scheme of things, I'm heartened by what I see as someone who talks with Gen Z near daily.
Yeah, I agree. So I just want to put a couple more things, then we're done with the Ecomundo report and we're going to go into other stuff that it's interesting. This says, and again, they do excellent research. Many men fear being called out or canceled. They feel anxiety that they'll be called out, which is fueling this backlash against diversity and equality. And I am fascinated by this one. I'm like the sensitivity to perceived in mistakes. Is that what's going on? I mean, explain that to me. Why this anxiety of being called out? Because I hear that in a lot of different circles. How do you see that one?
So again, I'm taking a gentler approach than I probably normally would. And I don't really know why. I don't think that those fears are misguided. I teach, so I'm in a Department of Management and Organizational Behavior, and I teach all of the people parts of business, which also includes how managers and leaders show up in context of crises and what that means.
Mhm.
I say all that to say, over the last decade, we have seen a type of calling out become normalized that I think is profoundly toxic. Okay.
Mhm.
Let
Mhm.
me first anchor this by saying, and Scott, my work, we've gone back, a long ways at this point. Like, I'm not about giving men an out, right? Like, I think men have to do the work. It is vitally necessary, and no man has an excuse. There is a place to call out toxic behaviors, But I
Mhm.
do not believe the rise of cancel culture, or I would just call it collaborative calling out, where now social media or podcast streams or echo chambers online allow many folks, some of which are not always good actors, to build community that is designed to take down people's careers. And again, I want to give an out. Please take down the Matt Lauers and the Harvey Weinsteins and the Jeffrey Epsteins. Like, this is not a free pass. But this move to take down everybody because of sort of some small flip of the tongue,
Perceived
accidental.
incorrectness somewhere. Yeah.
There's a great motto. I'm not sure if you're familiar with her work. Her name is Kim Scott. Kim Scott was an executive at Google. She wrote this beautiful book. It's called Radical Candor. And it is like the ethos from which I operate, which says, all right, you don't let down your values or your guard. Sometimes you got to like call people out. You have to hold people accountable, but you can do that with clarity and you can also do that with kindness. And you can say, hey, man who dropped the ball, said the wrong thing, said something they didn't think about the extensions of. I care about you. And I don't think that's a good expression of your character. I don't think that's actually what you meant to say. I don't think you're creating the world that you want to see for your kids, your siblings, the community that you say that you love. So I have to call you on. I have to like let you know what you said is problematic because that's a very different type of calling out that centers the person, it centers empathy, and it leads towards growth and change. Cancel culture does not. That's
Right.
why we see this profound backlash effect where people are like, you're going to call me out? All right, I'm going to double down. Like, I'm going to go even harder. There's psychological theory that predates the internet that talks about that
Yeah,
effect.
that kind of transgressive behavior then. It's very
Yeah.
much
So,
sort of
like,
an FU, yeah.
well, if I can't win, then darn it, I'm just going to join the opposition.
Yeah,
And so,
exactly.
again, we have used bad communication channels in bad faith when we need a good faith attempt to call people in and to drive towards growth and change. And that change, you got to change your communication style to get there.
So, and I want to
Actually,
make sure
how we doing on time? Yeah.
we're running, so I know we're gonna have to wrap this one, but Radical Candor by Kim Scott.
Yes, Radical Candor by Kim Scott. So good. Care personally, challenge directly. And she talks about how we often flee to different things like insincerative manipulation, or we'll flee to obnoxious aggression, or like we won't give people the feedback they need to grow and change because we're concerned about their feelings or our feelings, or we'll be so blunt that we'll forget they're another person. Her model, Radical Candor, gets right to the heart of the issue. Care personally, challenge directly. It's like that book and one other book, Super Communicators by Charles Duhigg. We'll talk about connection, I'm sure, in the next little passage here. Those are the two books that I think hold the key to effective communication for changing the tides as for what we're talking about here.
And you know that nobody had any of this stuff modeled for them when they were growing up, Phil. I guarantee that's the part of the problem. We haven't seen, I mean, and we certainly don't get it from our wider world anywhere now. I mean, unless we've got some niche podcast interest, it's not in our world. So I think to myself, because I do empathize, I always say, you know, no man alive today created patriarchy. I give you all a pass. Y'all didn't create it. You grew up with the same thing. Now let's move forward, kind of thing. But you know, we don't get alternatives modeled enough for us to say, okay, what are how can we do this?
Yep.
You know, I have such mixed feelings about the cancel culture, and then I'll come back to Ashley because you know the hashtag Me Too movement. I mean, it was necessary. There was something there, and now it's like, okay, did that
Yeah.
now create this sense of, I'm sorry, I have to say it like backlash. I totally understand how that came about. I don't know.
So,
I don't know how it could have evolved differently, but you definitely see the cycle spinning.
yeah, and I think the lines are blurry, but I don't see me hashtag me too as a part of cancel culture in any way. The intent wasn't to take people down. The
Oh,
intent was to
great.
build a system of support. And so the good things about social media are that it's created a space for people to connect all across the world with similar experiences, cultural backgrounds. That's a really, really
Yeah.
good thing.
Yeah.
Again, I'm not soft on, you know, a sort of someone who has committed an act that would be called out by a Me Too. I don't think that fits within cancel culture. Maybe it's adjacent. I think what we've seen, like, you listen to your run-of-the-mill podcast, and people are producing episode after episode, and they're trying to, like, you know, monetize, and they're trying to occupy space. And so what you'll find, you just go in the podcast sphere, you'll find like people like being weirdly nitpicky about what are really small innocuous behaviors,
Yeah.
preferences at best, That's really what I'm speaking of. We've gotten so comfortable critiquing everything that now, when it is a Me Too or it is a racial issue, nobody takes it seriously because everything has gotten canceled or called out. So the big stuff is like, oh, this
We
canceled
lost perspective.
BS. You know what I mean? Like it's counterintuitive. So to be clear, call out the stuff that needs to be called out. Don't get soft. Don't bring the boundary conditions back. We're not going backwards here, but to move forward, I do think we have to parse out the nuance and think about communication.
Nice.
We're going to have to take a pause there.
We are.
So Dr. Phil will be back with us for part 2, and we're going to take this even further in more directions. So Dr. Phil, thank you so much.
You got
So
it.
interesting. So interesting. Okay.
To be continued. Thank you.